So I'll be talking a lot from my experience, my little bit of experience that I've had with beef so far, and then also from my 400 level animal science classes at Penn State. So we're going to be going through some graphs and numbers, so get your thinking cap on. I want to look at production metrics. This is one way that we can measure our efficiency. So we'll be looking at average daily gain and that sort of thing. And then we'll be looking at optimizing our harvest time point so that we both capitalize on profit and we make a good product. And of course, this is in relation to the finishing stage of cattle. So that's about from 700 pounds up to 1,200, whatever you take them up to, with that said. So why are we talking about efficiency with grass-fed beef? Typically, we talk about marketing, right? How to capture the best dollar for our product. We talk about consistency, like Tim mentioned, making sure that our product is good across the board. And we talk about grass management. But I actually want to spend some time talking about efficiency. I took this quote from Robert Tomman, and he says, with a focus on value added in grass-fed beef, efficiency is often an afterthought. I argue that efficiency is one of the single most important factors. And I agree. We can obviously capture our top value dollar off the top, but there's also a lot of low-hanging fruit that we can capture off the bottom as well. So I like numbers, I like equations. So here's a basic profit equation. Revenue minus cost equals profit. Nothing mind-blowing, right? So we got our graph here. Between these two lines would be our profit. We can either raise this line, our revenue, to increase that area, or we can lower our production cost to capitalize on our profit. So I want to focus on how we can lower that. So, I didn't mean to show that. Average daily gain. Somebody, if you read it, you can get a forage stick. So what's the average daily gain equation? Does anybody know? Average daily gain.
Well, the way I do it, I weigh them each month. So I basically take last month versus this month. Hopefully there's a weight gain divided by the amount of days in between the two weighs. And that's my average weight gain.
Yeah, so John's exactly right. Do you want a forage stick? Do you have one?
Yeah, sure I do. So I can give it to one of my clients.
Yeah, you can give it to a customer. So just like John said, average daily gain. We're looking at how many total pounds our cattle are gaining per day on feed. And that's how we can set a benchmark for ourselves, how we can improve. So grain-fed beef, we're shooting for 3 pounds or over. Grass-fed beef, we're shooting for 2 pounds. And these are general. We can get better, we can get worse, depending on our operation, time of year, everything else. Does anybody know what they're getting currently? 2.3, okay.
1.9.
1.9, okay, so you're basically at 2.
We're about 1.8 to 1.9.
Okay, so 2 is a pretty fair number then. Awesome. So decreasing production costs. These are actually 5 steers that I got a year ago. This was what I call a case study. We only have 5 head. At my farm, we have half an acre in pasture. So not a whole lot to work with. But I want to take a moment to look at the total days on feed portion of our average daily gain equation. So these 5 head, we marketed them at different times. So these are the days that they were on feed. Obviously, we have 222 days here. We have about 65 more days here. And we can look at our net profit here. As a general rule of thumb, it starts pretty high and plummets pretty quick. You'll notice here that this is actually higher than this number. That's because I bought this guy for a really good price. But if there's one thing to take away, keep in mind that the longer we keep these guys on feed, the more it's costing us. I do need to put an asterisk in here though, because these guys were being fed grain and silage, which is more expensive than our pastured grass, right? But in the winter time when we're feeding them baleage, when we're feeding them stored hay, that gets pretty expensive pretty quick. So just something to keep in mind. So the 4 factors affecting average daily gain. Does anybody want to take a guess at one of these factors?
Genetics.
You don't count anymore, John. Yeah.
Feed quality?
Yep, we got that. Yep, that's one. Give him a forage stick. Anybody else?
Conditions?
Do you want to explain more?
Yeah, weather conditions.
Weather conditions. Yeah, that's not actually one I had up there, but that can definitely.
That would count.
That would count. Yeah.
Intake?
Intake. Yep. That affects average daily gain. Yeah. So the four I had are genetics, diet. So that would be the quality, health of the animal, and then what I call grazing efficiency for grass-fed beef. So if there's a couple things that my professors pounded into my noggin at college, one of them was don't skimp on genetics. If we only have a certain amount of money to spend, we don't want to save money by skimping on genetics because you'll end up eating it on the back end. So I'm not going to get into the argument about what genetics are best for grass-fed beef. I think it's whatever works for your farm, and that can be quite a bunch of different things. But I would say that within each breed, there's a large variation. So there's a couple things that we're looking for overall when we go to purchase our cattle. We want a moderate framed steer, right? Nothing too big, no British cattle. Easy fleshing, early maturing, and then we want a big old deep body, big gutted. We like those barrels, right? We want to see those barrels. So this is our cattle that we were grazing this fall. A little bit on the genetics here. So we paid more for these cattle. Coming off grass, we actually lost money. I did the calculations, we actually lost money. But they had good genetics behind them, they had good health, they were ready to rock and roll. So I think we're gonna capture more value in the feedlot and end up on top. So just because you're paying more for genetics doesn't mean you're gonna have less profit. A lot of times you actually end up having more profit. Another thing, don't skimp on nutrition. So key components of a diet, Tim listed a lot of these. Can anybody give me one?
Minerals?
Minerals, yep.
Water.
Yeah, that's usually the tricky one. I wasn't expecting anybody to get that. Anything else?
Protein.
Protein, what's the biggie? Energy, yep. You guys got them all, good job. So manage your pastures to maximize those components. Like Tim said, energy comes in the upper part of the grass stem, so that's why we don't want to be grazing low. Protein, like Tim said, we only need 12%, and typically the grass is at about 16, 18%, so we're really getting enough protein. Minerals, we like to supplement those, and then of course water. So really manage your pastures to maximize these components. And then of course graze your grass in the vegetative stage, clip pastures. So one of our faults from grazing this fall, so we were paying somebody to graze our cattle for us. We would go over on the weekends, check out the pastures, check out the cattle, but he was the one managing. And we knew he wasn't clipping the pastures, and we asked him to clip the pastures, but they really never got clipped, right? So we figured out our average daily gain at the end of the season. We had 1.6 average daily gain, and we were feeding them corn grain, which is really bad. And I really think that it's because the pastures weren't clipped. The farm went out of business the beginning of the year, so they hadn't been grazed all year, so we had old mature grass, and we ate that on the back end.
And another factor for this year was the cloudy weather.
Yeah.
You will not make as much gain on grass with cloudy weather.
Yep, we need the sun to make energy, and if we didn't have the sun this year, so we didn't have the energy content that we do a lot of years. And then another thing I want to put in here, begin with good forage genetics. There is a lot of difference between the grasses. And yeah, so this is a picture of the one pasture we were grazing. I think anybody could say that it's not the best pasture here. Yeah. So number 3, don't skimp on health. This is another thing I did. So of course with health we have our dewormers, our vaccinations, and our fly control. The cattle that we graze that I've been talking about, we brought them in August. We're like, do we need fly tags? We don't need fly tags. We should have put fly tags on there, and then we had the mature grass too, right? So the grass scratched our eyes, the flies got in there, the flies bring pink eye, and we treated way too many for pink eye. Yeah, so invest in fly control. And I would also say that genetics from your previous owner also plays a lot in the health of the animal. So it's always good to ask the producer how they're produced and kind of the background there. So going back to my case study.
Do you recommend trying to source stockers from like the closest as possible so you're not pulling animals from a different environment?
I would say not necessarily. The environment changes farm to farm, so no matter if you go from your farm here to a mile down the road, it's still going to change. I would say the biggest thing is find a producer that has good genetics and stick with that. Then you're not always testing out new genetics and trying to manage something. It gives you a little bit more consistency. That would be probably my advice. So yeah, this dude here, take notice how he's licking his chops. He's eating silage. He's nice and he's got a barrel on him, right? I bought these guys from an owner. I asked him, hey, were these guys vaccinated? Oh yeah, they were vaccinated. Okay, great. We took him into the feedlot and he got pneumonia, a type of pneumonia that we really can't treat, and he went downhill quick. He looked like that guy pretty soon. So I, say what?
It's all stress.
Stress also in the feedlot is kind of like kindergarten. Yeah, you get a lot of disease going on. That's definitely one thing that's better about grass-fed. You guys have healthier herds. I will say that any day of the week. So I called the producer back and I researched some more. And he's like, oh yeah, I gave him 1 round of a killed vaccine, which is basically about nothing. So do your research there. He almost died. Thankfully he didn't. And we sent him to market and made $9 on him. So
That was the $9 one.
that was the $9 one. You got it. So several questions to consider. This is the term I coined, grazing efficiency. So basically, how well are we grazing our pastures? So several questions to consider. How much grass is each steer getting per bite? If we graze our pastures high, it's going to be a decent amount. If we graze them really low, they'll probably get half of the amount per bite. What is the energy density of each bite? And again, that goes back to height too. If we're grazing really low stuff, we're getting more protein, not a lot of energy. How far does a steer have to travel for each bite? Again, if our pastures are really on the low side, he's probably going to have to go pretty far, find a nice clump of grass that he can get a good mouthful on. So just keep in mind that quality and quantity equals less time grazing and more time ruminating and gaining weight. They don't have to travel as far, and they also have more rest time. And then of course, if you have inadequate forage, you have more bites, more time searching for food, and less time relaxing. And relaxing, of course, is when they build the muscle. So another thing to keep in mind as you're grazing the pastures, it's not just about quality management from the health of your pasture standpoint, it's also about how well your cattle can take advantage of that grass. Another thing I want to really encourage you guys to do is to measure. Whether that's average daily gain or whether that's pounds of beef produced per acre per year. You could do per year, you could do per month, whatever works for you guys. But I think if you can get a hold of a scale on the front end and the back end, and that's going to be really helpful for you guys. Because really, if we don't know where we're at, how do we know where we're going, right? If we don't know our numbers, it's kind of like driving without a roadmap. So I really encourage you guys that if you can, get some weights on your animals and see where you guys are at. So just a summary for this portion of my presentation: good genetics plus good forage plus good health plus good grazing efficiency equals increased average daily gain and therefore increased efficiency. So just all things to keep in mind while we're producing livestock. All right, so the next portion of my talk, and probably the one I'm most excited for, is optimizing harvest. So we're actually going to look at how the steers grow and kind of how they change their growth emphasis. So this is coming from a lot of my beef cattle production classes in college. So 2 graphs here. Let's take a moment to wrap our minds around this. So these are growth curves. We have time and we have weight on that axis. So this would be when they were born. And this is how much of each different category they have on them. So they have a little bit of bone, mostly muscle. Or excuse me, this is what they're putting on. So they're gaining more muscle compared to bone. As we get to middle age, they're still gaining quite a bit of muscle. They're getting more bone on there, and they're increasing in fat. Over here, this is when we're finishing the cattle. They're putting on a lot more fat, a little bit of muscle, and they've basically stopped growing their skeleton. Down here, we have the same thing, just with percentage. So when they're born, most of that weight gain is going towards muscle. You can see bone is decreasing and fat is increasing. So why does that matter? Does anybody know? No go? Okay, then I'll keep going.
You feed differently for all those things.
Yeah. Yeah, you can. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Higher hanging.
Higher hanging weight? Okay, yep. So another graph too, we'll stick this in the back of our heads, and I want to look at this. So this is our average daily gain in general of each steer. At birth, they're growing really fast. It's like a baby. They gain weight like crazy.
And why are they gaining so fast?
More than mother's milk.
Drinking milk.
Drinking milk. And then we can see a big downward trend. And it really tails off here. So this is where we're finishing our cattle. They're not gaining much weight per day. So keep that in mind. The site I got this graph off of said that this is about the proper time to send them to slaughter. Decreased feed efficiency. So we have our live weight here, and we have pounds of feed per pound of gain. So how much feed does it take to produce 1 pound of beef, 1 pound of steer? That's what we're looking at here. So at 400 pounds, we only need 4 pounds of feed to produce 1 pound. At 1,200 pounds, we need about 12 pounds to produce 1 pound of beef. So again, question why? Number one, your maintenance requirement increases. So your maintenance requirement is basically the energy it takes to perform bodily functions. So that's breathing, heart beating, blood circulation, but doesn't include movement, doesn't include actual putting pounds on. And of course, it takes a lot less energy to maintain 400 pounds than it does to maintain 1,200 pounds. In addition to that, the efficiency of gaining fat versus gaining muscle is a lot lower. And remember those graphs from several slides back, we're gaining more fat here than we are muscle. The growth emphasis has changed. So to put this into perspective, for humans, it takes 1,600 to 1,700 calories per pound of muscle. It takes about double the amount per pound of fat. So basically, you need more calories to produce a pound of beef. And you have a higher maintenance requirement. Yeah.
When you talk about pounds of feed, are you referring to dry matter intake or?
Yes.
And is this a grain-based diet or is this a forage-based diet? Because it would be different.
Yeah, it would be different. So I don't want to say that 12 is enough. This is probably from a grain-based diet. I'm pretty sure it would be.
And maybe it's pound of dry matters of the ration.
And I think it would be pounds of dry matter, correct? Because water doesn't help us gain weight. So, but the same would hold true for grass-fed beef. The numbers might be a little bit different, but the trend should still be the same. So second thing, do not hold. Do not hold the beef cattle past when they're done. Of course, we're putting more dollars of feed into them. They get a decreased rate of gain and decreased feed efficiency. And also, the carcass becomes a little bit more undesirable. The finish actually gets a little bit patchy, and the quality decreases to some extent. So it's costly to keep cattle past their optimum weight. So that's the main point there for you guys. But of course, we can't go too far to the other end of the spectrum, right? So I have two scenarios here. So we're gonna buy a feeder steer for 700 pounds and sell him at $1.55. We're gonna sell him at 900 pounds. So this is probably way before anybody would think about doing this, but just to show the difference, I'm kind of make it a little bit exaggerated. At $2 a pound, we get a total of that. Our profit is about $715. And I don't know if these numbers are right. It's probably kind of high-ish.
I was going to say, if you're still in that market, I've got about 60 of them.
That's what I figured. Say what?
1,080 should be 1,800, right?
I wish.
No, it should be.
Yeah,
It should be. That's a typo.
Oh, is it really?
Because you would have only made $5.
All right, sorry about that. All right, we're in the negatives there. So scenario B, we buy the same weight calf for $1.55, cost us the same amount, and check my math on this one. We sold at 1,200 pounds instead of 700 pounds. And we get a total of 2,400. Is my math right on there?
Your math's right on the other one. You just have a typo. 900 pounds is £2 or $2 a pound.
Yeah,
You just have math.
yeah.
Okay, awesome. Okay, that's what I like to hear. So we get a profit here of about 1,300. So we're gaining more profit because we're putting more pounds on the steer. So of course, it's all relative to what genetics you have. Some cattle finish out earlier than others. The site I got this off of said that the optimum carcass composition is 65% muscle, 23% fat, whatever. But just know that a small framed animal can finish out at 900 pounds, medium frame at 1,100, and a larger frame at 1,300. So it's all relative. So I really encourage you guys to crunch your own numbers and kind of see where you're at with that. But we do really need to balance between yield, so how large we let our steers grow, and then quality. Obviously, we still need to get a proper amount of finish on them so that we're giving our customers a good, tasteful product, right? And then, like I said, know your genetic potential. Know if they're going to finish out at 900 pounds, 11, or 1,300 pounds. So basically, we leave money on the table if we're harvesting too early. And I am flying through this, so Tim, maybe you should get your other presentation ready.
Really?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Any questions up to this point? All right, cool. Then we'll keep going. So when do we know when to harvest our cattle? So those of you guys who have a lot of experience, you guys are probably really good at picking out the finished cattle. Those of us who don't have too much experience looking at cattle, we'll go through some things to look for to make sure that your cattle is finished and ready for market. So we have a lot of visual indicators we can look at. One rule of thumb that I learned in college that I thought was really good is that cattle finish front to back, top to bottom. So keep that in mind. If you want to write it down on your papers, go for it. But it's helped me as I'm looking at cattle to see if they're finished. So we have a line there. So they're starting at their shoulder, putting on finish, and they'll end up down here. Any questions with that? Okay. So the first place you'll see finish is right at their chest, right at their forearm. It gets a little squishy there, right? Next place, you go down. It gets a little squishier down below. And then your tail head and your brisket kind of fill in at the same time, right? We start to develop pones up here, and then our brisket starts to fill out, gets a little squarer, gets a little fuller. And then finally, our rear flank begins to drop. It fills in with a lot of fat, and when it's done, it should be about the same level as your foreflank. So again, that's probably the last thing to look for. And this steer in general, I'll talk about him a little bit. You can see that he has a little bit of finish going on here. There's not quite as much muscle definition up there. You can't really see any ribs. But is his flank filled out? No. So he's starting to finish, but he's not quite ready for market yet. So the tailhead pones. Who here has heard of pones before? It's a very animal sciencey term. We got one. Anybody else? Okay. So the pones are basically the fat bubbles that fill in on either side of the tail head. So we got one on each side. You can see them there. Can you see them from the back? Tim, is the resolution okay?
I know what I'm looking for now.
Tim knows what he's looking for.
Train me.
From a back view, you see them both kind of sticking out here. He has very big fat pones on him, and he's probably gonna grade prime. He's got definitely enough finish on him. This guy too, you can see in his front, he's very smooth looking, very filled out. His neck just kind of like blah. And then I'd say his flank is dropped too. There's always going to be a little bit of a height difference there, but for the most part it's dropped. So dropped flank, this is going into that again. We got a flank that's dropped to here, even with the foreflank. This guy here, what's the status on him?
Flank's not ready yet.
I'd agree. Yeah, we got like a V going on there. He should be more like that. Yeah, also, as Aaron said, the tail head probably isn't filled out like it should be.
Brisket's not very full either.
Yep, yep. So those are some things to look for, but he needs to be on feed. Probably, depends what you're feeding him, but probably 2 months longer at least. So this is your brisket here, of course, something that we like to eat. But this is a very full, very square brisket. You probably won't see many briskets like this out on pasture. I don't see many this full in the feedlot, but that's an exaggerated example, hopefully to help train your eye. Some people talk about the cod filling out. So the cod would be, after the steer is castrated, it would be where the testicles had been. And at the very late stages of finishing, there's actually going to be some fat that deposits in there. But it's usually hard to tell because usually the tail's hanging down and sometimes it gets swollen back there, so it can be a false indicator. But some people will talk about that. I usually don't use that as a reference though. And then goals as grass-fed beef producers. Again, just a summary of what we're aiming for. We want to produce a healthy, wholesome, and tasty product for our customers, right? One that our customers keep going back to. We want to produce a consistent product, as Tim said. And we also want to hopefully make a profit. And of course, to do that, we can decrease our production costs. And I would say spend money to make money here. In your genetics, and your nutrition, and in everything else, and your health. And then of course, optimize your harvest weight. Don't leave any dollars on the table, and don't be paying too much in feed that you don't necessarily have to put on the table. So any questions about any of that?